and my tenuous link for how this is going to fit in with my costume-based channel. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, Blue Lady Couture, and my whimsical little corner of the internet. This video is going to be a mini vlog of our trip to the Vasa Museum in Stockholm. Now I say mini vlog because I didn't actually go to the Vasa Museum with the intention of recording it to put out on the channel as a full vlog. The main reason for that is, if you're new to my channel, this is mainly a costuming channel, so very much if I'm not in my sewing room, you know, sewing costumes and projects for myself, when I go out and about to events and museums, they normally have a more historical costume or a costuming drama focus. And with the Vasa Museum, it doesn't really have that per se, so for that reason I wasn't intending to vlog it for the channel. That being said, the response I got to my recent video that I put out of our trip to the Royal Armoury Museum in Stockholm, which, although in and of itself is very much a costume focused museum, so many of you in the comments basically said, are you going to the Vasa next? Are you going to do a video of the Vasa? Did you see the Vasa while you were in Stockholm? And given the success of that video, I thought I'd do a test of whether you would like to see more general historical museum content on my channel, and whether I start to put a little bit more of that in. So if that is something you would like to see more of, do let me know in the comments down below. I have been back through the footage that Mr. BLC and I did take while we're at the Vasa Museum. We did take some footage, but it was very much, you know, hardy snap footage for our own personal memories. But there is enough there that I can put this into a mini vlog for you, along with some of the photos that we took while we were there as well. And what I'm going to do really is kind of a little bit more of a voiceover of our visit, explaining kind of what you can see in the footage, rather than me just, you know, filming throughout the museum, because that's not what we did. There are some aspects of the museum that we didn't film at all, which obviously now I'm kicking myself about. But you know, it's one of those, you know, do we want endless bits of footage, you know, that are going to sit on a memory card or in a, you know, a Facebook family album or something that, you know, aren't really going to get seen. And sometimes it's good to go to a museum and actually just visit it, you know, and visually take in with your own eyes and your own mind what you're seeing in front of you. So yeah, so this is a little bit different to the Royal Armoury Museum, but I still hope you will enjoy it and follow along. And as always, please do leave me any comments down below. If you haven't been and you're going to Stockholm, I do highly recommend it. It is probably the museum that Stockholm is most well known for, and probably one of the things that most people go there, you know, and it's top of their list of things to visit, things to see and do in the city. But if you don't know what the Vasa is and you've never heard of her before, then let me enlighten you. So the Vasa is a Swedish warship, and she was built to be the royal flagship of the Swedish Navy in the 1620s. Yes, that's right, the 1620s, almost 400 years ago. But what's remarkable about her is that she set off on her maiden voyage in 1628, and she was barely 1,300 metres from the shipyard where she had been built in Stockholm harbour when she sunk. She then lay in the bottom of Stockholm harbour for over 300 years until she was rediscovered in the 1950s, and then in the 1960s they raised her. And when they raised her, they discovered that not only was she remarkably well preserved for a ship that has lain at the bottom of the sea for 300 years, she was absolutely incredible in the design, the decorative details on her, and the sheer scale and size of her. It's hard to put into words, and I'm not even sure the video does justice to her. When you think this ship is 400 years old and this is what they built, it's, yeah, unbelievable. And that is why she is so phenomenally well known, and why the Vasa Museum is one of the top rated museums to visit in the world, and should certainly be top of your list to visit if you ever go to Stockholm. So after she is raised out of the sea in 1962, she then undergoes another 27 years of procedures and preservation work. And then in 1990, the museum that we see today opened to the public. So the museum was basically built around her, and of course the museum is designed to keep her at very specific climatic conditions, so just the right kind of humidity and temperature. And I have to say, it's absolutely incredible. There's no messing about. You go through the ticket booths, you walk through the big doors, and she's right there. And she's huge, she's absolutely massive. And it still blows my mind that she was built 400 years ago. I just can't get my brain around how did they build ships? And then add to that the decorative details they put on this particular ship. It's insane, really insane. So the museum spans several floors, and you basically can go from the keel, which would be right down below the water level, all the way up to pretty much the first height of the lower crow's nest. And when you're visiting the museum, as you approach the museum from the outside, you will see that there are masts essentially built into the architecture of the museum, and they actually replicate how tall her masts would have been originally. Now, unfortunately, it's only the first third of the masts that survive and is displayed within the museum, but it's really interesting and such a great way to kind of explain and demonstrate how tall her mast would have been by incorporating the rest of the mast into the architecture on the outside of the building. I think that's fantastic. But yeah, again, I'm going to keep going on about the sheer scale of this ship, because it is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. So you could literally just spend all day just going around and around the ship on the different levels. Now, obviously you can't go on the ship or in the ship, although I think they do occasionally do very special private tours that will take you actually on the ship itself. But obviously, because there's so many visitors, that they just can't, for preservation reasons, they just cannot have thousands and thousands of visitors trying to go around a 400-year-old ship that's made of wood, because she's just going to get completely damaged. So yes, you can't go on the ship per se, but you can get. You can get so close. Not quite within touching distance, but it's there. course, alongside the ship, you do also have additional displays of the artefacts that they found when they raised her. And I think that is also probably one of the really fascinating things about the Vasa, is because she sunk so quickly and so unexpectedly. Any ship sinking, should be unexpected, but yeah, because it all happened so quickly, you've literally got a snapshot of life in Sweden in 1620 or 1628. So there's the supplies that were on board. What did a ship have on board for a voyage? So there's food supplies, animal supplies. Animals were kept on board for not just necessarily for eating in and of themselves, but chickens for eggs, milk from cows and goats, that kind of thing. Eating implements, cooking implements, and then not only that, they also had all the sails and the rigging as well. And this was one of the things that really surprised me as we kind of were exploring the artefacts that were saved from the museum, is that a lot of the fabric and the rope from the sails actually survived. Now, I may get this wrong, but I believe it's something to do with the kind of the salt levels and the temperature of the water in the Stockholm archipelago. It's very specific, and it's very good at preserving things, which is why so much from the Vasa survives. And one of those things was the sails and the rigging. As she set out on her maiden voyage, she wasn't actually fully rigged, so a lot of the sails were still stored, folded up below decks, because obviously just sailing out of a harbour, you don't necessarily need to be fully rigged in full-blown sail. That's probably a bit overkill. As it turned out, even just one sail, it was overkill for the Vasa. But yeah, so we were wandering around the displays at human level, kind of at eye level, at floor level, where you're walking around. They had the kind of remnants of the sails and the ropes and the rigging on display, and got, wow, that's amazing. They've got, actual fabric that survived out of the water from 400 years ago. How cool is that? And then we kind of turned around, and then we suddenly realised that the back wall of the museum, and I've got a photograph here of that I took with Mr. Bielsi and our friend who was kind of taking us around on a tour of Stockholm. You can see them in the foreground, and in the background is the back wall of the museum. And then you realise that back wall of the museum is actually one of the sails. And again, it's just adding to that scale. The sheer size of this ship is unbelievable. And to think that sail, that's cloth fabric, has survived. The last bit that I want to talk about, and unfortunately I didn't get any video footage and I didn't really take any good photos of this section, and that is because it deals with the people that lost their lives when the Vasa sank. And how I mentioned that the preservation of the ship and what was on board was really remarkable because of the conditions in the water. That also goes for the bodies of the people that died. And yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to see the displays that they had, but I feel a bit weird filming dead people, and obviously people that have died in a tragedy, it's so I don't unfortunately have any footage of this bit, so I will just briefly talk to you about it, and I hope that won't be too dull for you, just looking at me on camera. But yeah, I think they believe that about 30 people died when the Vasa sank, and mostly that was people that were below decks and couldn't get out because it all happened so quickly, and not because she keeled over essentially. obviously it ripped the cannons from the moorings. Obviously anything that was stowed probably came loose and fell on people, and yeah, and obviously absolutely horrific way to die. Not that there's any way I suppose is a good way to die, but you know, but yeah, in circumstances like that. So when they raised her and they began obviously exploring within her below decks, they obviously found the very well preserved remains of the people that lost their lives. And I say there were some that were trapped under the cannons, you know, still in situ. They have uncovered and preserved the remains of 17 complete or at least partial skeletons of separate individuals. One of the skeletons actually still had its brain inside, you know, the skull cavity. Yeah, that's a bit grim. Let's just think about that for a minute. But because of the amazing preservation, they also have things like a lot of the clothing remnants survive. I was going to say that the sail survived. So yeah, so the clothing on the victims survived. They were still wearing their shoes. They had, you know, things in their you know, about their person, you know, money pouches with personal belongings and things in, you know, day-to-day things in them. And another thing that's actually really interesting is that there were women and children on board. So they do have 2 women who sadly died on the Vasa when she sunk. And I think they also have the remains of a child. And it was a child that would have been too young to have been a ship's boy. So I think from about 12 years old, a boy could basically serve in the Navy as a ship's boy. But yeah, I think this child was thought to be about 8 years old. And of course the old adage is that, you know, it's bad luck for a woman to be on board a ship, and obviously women, you know, certainly didn't serve on ships. I think so. You know, so why were women, you know, on board the royal flagship of the Swedish Navy? Well, apparently, when in Swedish kind of home waters, it was acceptable for the crew to have their wives and children on board, and I believe because obviously this was the kind of the maiden sailing of the ship, the families of the sailors and the crew were allowed to travel kind of up to another port where they were going to be heading before she basically took on her full complement of the soldiers, marines, and obviously then she would go off and go to whatever duty she was needed on. So yeah, so again it comes back to just having that little snapshot of life, you know, for both men and women in Stockholm, Sweden at this time, you know, this one day in history. So obviously from studying the bodies, they've been able to glean that, you know, what kind of sort of lifestyle they had, you know, what food they were eating, you know, what health conditions they had. I think they found out that every single one of the bodies they found had some kind of healed bone breakages of some description, even the women. And my tenuous link for how this is going to fit in with my costume based channel is, of course, you know, it's amazing to focus on the really grand surviving costumes of let's be honest, you know, the elite, the ruling classes, the nobility, kings and queens. But it's also really interesting to see that other end of the scale, you know, what the, you know, day-to-day lower classes were wearing, carrying about their person like that. You know, because it's all well and good seeing, you know, the amazing royal costumes from state occasions, but, you know, they were worn probably just that once. It's not necessarily even what, you know, the king and queen were wearing day to day. Now, I'll be honest, the 1600s is not an era that I'm not particularly interested in personally, but you know, it's no less interesting, you know, just to see that difference between, you know, the lower classes, which, let's be honest, is probably what most of our own personal ancestors would have been, you know, wearing. Although I tend to have no Swedish ancestry or anything like that, but, you know, generally speaking, I find that, you know, just as interesting as, you know, the beautiful blinged up royal gowns, as stunning and amazing as they are. And if you go to the Royal Army Museum, and I think there are probably some clips of this in my my vlog from our visit there, but they have some costumes from the Swedish king at the time, from about 1627, so literally, you know, just before the Vasa sailed. The king at the time was one of the Gustavs, and I'm going to be honest and say I don't 100% know how I'm supposed to properly say his name. It's always written as Gustav, Roman numerals 2, Adolf. So I don't know, if I just say it as Gustav II Adolf, that just sounds really weird, or Gustav II Adolf, that also sounds weird. So I'm going to call him Gustav Adolf II. I apologise if that is wrong. I'm assuming that's probably an anglicisation of the way Swedish perhaps says the words. So I do apologise if that is not the right way to pronounce his name, but to me that just makes sense, so yeah. So they, in the Royal Army Museum, they have some of the costumes worn by Gustav Adolf II in 1627. And if I can, I shall put a clip in somewhere here. But also feel free to go and have a look at my other vlog from the Royal Army Museum. But so there again, you literally have that snapshot of difference between what the royal family were wearing, and so I don't have any footage of it, but in the museum at the Vasa, you know, detail of what the lower classes, what a sailor and perhaps his wife or daughters might have been wearing. You know, they have the trunks that the sailors took on board, and within that would have been, you know, their clothing that they'd, you know, and all their worldly possessions. I think like pairs of gloves that, you know, he might not have needed straight away or be wearing on that particular day in August when, you know, we were visiting Stockholm in August, and, you know, it was, you know, like a beautiful English summer's day. It was really warm and mild. You're not going to be wearing gloves, but by the time you're out, you know, perhaps in the North Sea or the Baltic Sea or wherever the Vasa was sailing, in awful weather, then yes, you're probably going to need a pair of gloves. And obviously they've had things like sewing kits, mending kits, and all that kind of stuff that I find really interesting and fascinating. But I am probably going to stop waffling at this point here and finish up this video. So I'm sure you've heard enough from me, and as I have unfortunately run out of clips from our visit to the Vasa. So yes, I do apologise that this video is perhaps not exactly the museum visit that you might have wanted it to be, but I do nonetheless hope you still found it interesting, and who knows, maybe it has inspired you to go on a trip to Sweden and see the Vasa, the Royal Army Museum, and any of the other amazing museums that are in the fabulous city of Stockholm. I cannot recommend it highly enough if you have any kind of interest in European history, royal history, costume history. If you have liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. That really helps my channel out. And if you would like to subscribe, you'll be notified of when my next video goes out. Here on this channel, my focus is on costuming videos, so sometimes you will find me in my sewing room making costumes, historical costumes, fantasy costumes, and then sometimes I'm going out and about to events where I might be able to wear those costumes, or I'm going to museums or places of historical interest, which normally has a costuming kind of link to them. But then who knows, if you like this video and it proves really popular, then I might start putting in a few more just general historical interest videos and museums on my list as well. So yes, thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!